Okay, so let's start this afternoon with Emmy Noether. Welcome everybody, especially welcome to Ilka Agricola and Capi Corrales, who agreed, who accepted my invitation and agreed to give two talks about not necessarily the mathematics, but the society in which Emmy Noether lived and how she interacted with the mathematical community. So this is, in some sense, part of a project which we are carrying out with some students about motivated by the exhibition, which is taking place in the corridor leading to Miguel de Guzman, which was first put up by students of Proyecto Cometas about women in mathematics. So the idea, which we had with my colleague Teresa, was to, okay, they did a good job, but I think we can be a little deeper, delve a little deeper into the details. So this is the starting point, and we're organizing this seminar, and then one meets Emmy Noether, which is a very complicated figure, philosophically and mathematically. So we thought, okay, that's above our possibilities, so we have to go to experts. And this is what I tried to do. So this is why Ilka, Agricola, and Capi Corrales are here. I don't want to say much more, just thank them again for accepting this and thanking you for being here. And I know somebody may be watching online or watch this later, so thank you all for connecting. And so the first talk is going to be doing mathematics in Emmy Noether's time. So a survey on the study of work situation of women mathematicians in Germany between the two world wars. We'll have a short pause, and then it will be about somehow the mathematical legacy of Emmy Noether by Capi Corrales. So let's just start. I have to put the presentation on, and then
Okay, well, thank you very much, Giovanni, for all your help, and thanks for the invitation. I'm not a historian of mathematics, but I like doing history of mathematics once in a while. I give myself a time off of research just to think about the story and the background of my own field, because I like reading original sources and looking into archives and things like that. So when Giovanni asked me to give a talk just about the career of Emmy Noether, I had the impression that it is better to put it in a broader context, right? Because she is such an exceptional figure that she's not very typical for her times. So this is the title. We shall see that, in fact, this could be viewed as a tribute to 100 years the celebration of the habilitation thesis of Emmy Noether, because that was in 1919 exactly. And why it was that year and not another time will become clear as well. What I'm saying is based on work in the archives of my university in Marburg, historical articles by some other colleagues, etc. So precise references will be given at the end. Okay, so let's start. 9. Nein, ich will ja nicht pointy, ich will auf die nächste Seite gehen.
Genau, aber wenn es aktiviert wird, dann ist nicht an und dann okay, jetzt nicht.
Kann ich auch hier weitergehen? Ja. Und vor?
Also mit den.
Okay. No, come on. I will stick with classical technology, I think. Okay, so what is this talk about? So first, I would like to situate it in the context of the history of science, because science is done by scientists, and therefore knowing something about the working and living conditions of scientists is going to tell us something about science is created and how scientific progress is influenced by these factors. A second very important point, in my opinion, is to view this topic in the historical context. Okay, we are talking about times in Middle Europe which are very much submitted to change, because we have industrialization taking place. We had the following deep changes in society. We had the formation of a working class where what is work, what is a job, changed drastically. The need for engineers, professionals in all kinds of areas emerged around these times, and by the two world wars, we had sometimes a shortage of male employees for all kinds of jobs, and this plays a big role as well. This is based, I said it before, on a case study carried out in Marburg, and you will understand why Marburg is representative and has anything to do actually with the topic, and also some particular figures from Marburg appearing. And finally, this does apply to Germany, to some extent neighboring countries like France and Austria in particular, but the situation in other parts of Europe will be very different, right? So it will also tell you something about the history and how the German university works. Okay. That's the part which I think is of historical interest as well. Okay, so let's have Marburg look at this. This is a typical old medieval charming university town. The university is almost 500 years old. We are right now preparing for the 500th birthday, founded by Philip, the first Landgrave of Hessen. This is the old university from the Middle Ages, reconstructed in the 19th century neo-Gothic style, and the aula in the building where all inaugural lectures and other things take place. This is, by the way, the oldest Protestant university in the world. That's clear because Martin Luther, that was just a few years earlier, so you can't be much older if you want to be Protestant. And as a consequence of one of the many wars of the 19th century, which we tend to forget, namely the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, Marburg and Göttingen, where Emmy Noether was, became part of Prussia, despite the fact that you would not believe that these cities are part of Prussia. It's not where you geographically locate Prussia. And the electorate of Hessen, Kurfürstentum Hessen and the Kingdom of Hanover, to which they belonged before, just disappeared from the map in 1866. Okay, so the conditions in Marburg and Göttingen were quite similar, and therefore this is good for a case study if one wants to know what the typical situation in the largest German state, Prussia, was after 1866. Okay, so let's have a look to get into the feeling of the time. How was mathematics done in German universities, let's say at the end of the 19th century? So, most universities, and that's the same for Marburg, mathematics was taught from the very beginning, but it was a time of professors who were typically not professors for one topic, but for several topics. So, a typical thing would be that you are a professor of mathematics and medicine, right? Or you raise through the ranks, you start with mathematics and later you become a professor of theology or something like that, right? You get some promotion. So only few really specialized in mathematics, and in Marburg, these would have been, for example, Denis Papin, which we consider more physicist, but he was professor of mathematics there. Right? In 1817, at least, mathematics and physics split from the rest of the faculties to found the Mathematisch-Physikalisches Institut, the founder being Christian Gerling, a student of Gauss, so that says a little bit about what topics of research were present in Marburg at the time. In 1885, finally saw the foundation of the faculty by Heinrich Weber. This is him, who was an algebraist, very active politician in science of his time. We have from him, for example, the theorem of Kronecker-Weber. He coined the names normal subgroups and other things. University at that time meant 1,000 students. This is small. And the situation of mathematics was similar to what it is today, namely this is not a mass topic, a topic for masses of students. Right? Only few pick mathematics, 10 to 30 when this mathematical seminar was founded, and later in around 1904 they had at least 75 students. Okay. All other math departments in Germany were approximately founded around the same time. So this is really the origin of mathematics as a separate topic at German universities. Now, Emmy Noether was born just a few years before the seminar in Marburg was founded, and she was a daughter of a wealthy Jewish family in Erlangen, which is in Bavaria, close to Nuremberg. And the first thing to notice is that her father, Max Noether, was a professor of mathematics, right, at the university in Erlangen, and he was handicapped because as a child he had gotten poliomyelitis. Right, therefore he had trouble walking and other difficulties. The brother of Emmy Noether, Fritz Noether, is quite a renowned mathematician as well, Fritz Noether. He was a professor in Breslau, which is now Wrocław in Poland, until 1933. He had lost his position just as Emmy Noether, had to immigrate and decided to go to the Soviet Union, where he became a professor in Tomsk, and with the Stalin purges, unfortunately lost his life after spending a few years in prison. He was executed in 1941 for spying for Germany and anti-Soviet propaganda. He was rehabilitated later, but that didn't make him alive again. And what we're going to see, and these things hint into that direction, is that the success of Emmy Noether would not have been possible without several beneficial circumstances that were particular to her biography. We'll point out afterwards what these are, and I did put success under quotation marks because obviously she was a very successful scientist, but she never was a full professor in her life. So the success is incomplete in that sense that she did never get in kind of a position the recognition she had deserved. Okay, so here is a controversial question. Should women be allowed to study? So in Germany, in 1897, there was a wide report prepared. Namely, prominent German scientists were asked for their opinions or reports inasmuch they deem women fit for university studies. And I will give you a few quotes of these. So this is a whole book. The book is online. You can read it through pages. But for every topic, there's only a few statements. But the whole is like 250 pages. So Max Planck, well-known, highly esteemed physicist, had the following opinion about the topic. He says, well, Amazons are against nature in the area of thought. Maybe in single topics like gynecology, perhaps the circumstances are different, but in general, it cannot be. We should really emphasize that nature itself has given women their role as mothers and in the house, and therefore you cannot go against the laws of nature, unless you will take into account that there will be severe consequences and damage caused, in particular for the next generation. Okay, clear statement? Professor Friedrich Sturmann, this is the shortest opinion in the whole book, because it just points two sentences. In my opinion, the foundation of gymnasium, and gymnasium is a high school for women, should be forbidden once and for all for sanity reasons. Okay. But we have other opinions as well. So here's Karl von Zittel. I do not know this person, unfortunately. This is geology, but he's more inclined to the other direction. So in my opinion, women are fit for studies of natural sciences just as much as men. I had in 3 cases the opportunity to convince myself that young ladies are able to follow lectures and studies, and I was convinced afterwards that they can learn and observe just as well as their male students, and in fact, quite often they are better in, flies is a very German word, flies, in diligence than the male students. Okay, and then we have Felix Klein, mathematician in Göttingen, who said, yeah, well, for example, in this semester I had less than 6 ladies in our mathematical courses and tutorials, and they were just equal to their male peers in all respects. Of course, by circumstances, these 6 ladies were all foreigners, namely 2 Americans, 1 English, 3 Russians. But there's no reason to believe that our German ladies would not be able to cope with the same material. if they are of adequate preparation, right? And this is the crucial point here, bei geeigneter Vorbereitung, assuming appropriate preparation. And this is the reference of the book. Yeah, Gutachten, hervorragend. So it says reports by excellent university professors, not just any university professors, excellent university professors, right? On the topic. So now, of course, we can laugh about these things now, but this was a serious topic of discussion. Okay, it was not common sense that women should be allowed to university, and each European country had found a different answer to the question. And so we are in controversial situation in the historical context. So all the people we are going to meet were people of their times. These lines of thoughts were part of their reality. We should not judge them by our opinions today. Okay, and this appropriate preparation is one of the keys to the problem, because to access university, you need to be able to follow courses. So in normal circumstances, you need a high school degree, which in German is called an Abitur. So how do you get an Abitur? So first, in 1812, so quite a while before, Prussia had decreed that only a gymnasium can grant the Abitur, and that the Abitur is a necessary requirement for entering university. Now that's a problem, because, so first, what gymnasium is a high school which always had this idea to prepare an elite of young children to higher tasks than just going to a normal school. And since the end of the 18th century, a whole tradition had formed around this gymnasium. Okay, so it's a very special German thing. A gymnasium is an elite school. That's this idea where you learn Latin and Old Greek and a lot of culture and history and all these things. And the main point is that in Germany, to become a teacher, you need to get a state diploma, a state examination, and there are 4 different types. Lehrer, Oberlehrer, Studienrat, Oberstudienrat. This is very German. But just remember, there are 4 types of teachers, and only the highest class was allowed to teach the upper classes at the gymnasium. Okay, and this made a huge difference, because the salaries and working conditions at the higher, when you were teaching the upper classes at, so just before the high school degree, at the gymnasium, your living working conditions would be much better than teaching at another school or general children, right? Okay, tuition fees at gymnasium were quite high. That prevented automatically children from poor families to go there. In 1888, Helene Lange, which was a women's rights activist in Berlin, started a petition to grant girls access to the gymnasium, because until these times, the gymnasium was just for boys. And if you need an Abitur to enter university, you see the problem, right? In 1893 only, the first gymnasium admitting girls was founded in Karlsruhe. In 1908, at least, finally, Prussia allowed the creation of gymnasium for girls. However, co-education, meaning just educating boys and girls together in the same school, became common in Germany only after 1968. So that's quite recent. Here's a typical image. So this is the Gymnasium Philippinum in Marburg, in a building which is not existing anymore, but that's how it looked like between the wars. So already, even if this law that you need a gymnasium and an Abitur to enter university, this just put into a law what was already practiced before. So already in 1527, the Marburg Gymnasium was founded in order to yield preparation for students entering the university, right? And which just spend some time there and then get a degree, and then they were admitted to university. Girls were admitted in 1953 at this high school. And there was a separate school for girls. And again, this is a very German name, a school for higher daughters, eine höhere Töchterschule. Okay, but of course, the curricula were quite different from other places, because when these schools were founded, it was basically meant to give higher education to girls so that they would be able to fulfill their role in society, but it was not meant to be a preparation for studying. Therefore, the curricula were different, and in particular in the natural sciences would not be sufficient for studying any natural science topic. Yeah. No, this is a purely social class issue. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It also has higher tuitions as just as a gymnasium. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was really just to educate the wives you wanted for the boys going to the gymnasium. Yeah, it is. Right. So how was Emmy Noether's path to university? Because in 1900, she was 18 years old. That would have been the time to get a degree, Abattoir, but how? So what did Emmy Noether do? So first in 1900, 18 years old, she passed, in fact, the examination for being a teacher of French and English at girls' school. Not a gymnasium, at a lower level, right? And then she was given permission to be a guest student in Göttingen. A guest student meant you had to ask every single professor to be allowed to attend the lectures. You were not allowed to take a degree, university degree, right? But the only thing which was allowed is you could prepare that for the next level of teaching examination, but that would still not be the one you need for gymnasium. Didn't make sense because there was no gymnasium for girls, so why should you take such a degree? In 1903, finally, Bayern, in which Erlangen was located, allowed, so just a few years before Preußen, that it was allowed that women may take an Abitur as an external candidate at a gymnasium. And that's what she did, right? So therefore, she stopped studying in Erlangen. And so the same year, 1903, is you're allowed to take the Abitur as an external candidate and you can enter university. And got a PhD in Erlangen 1907 under the supervision of Paul Gordon, second woman ever to get a PhD in mathematics in Germany. The other one just was forgotten because she didn't stay in mathematics. Now, what was special here? Well, first, Max Noether, being ill, had the habit for many years to take his daughter with him to the department to assist him. And therefore, she learned mathematics from little on, of course. She knew the math professors in Erlangen who had to accept her and propose a PhD topic to her. So they knew her and she knew them. The family's wealth allowed to pay for private tuition as necessary in order to prepare for the external Abitur, because that's, of course, much more expensive if you need a private teacher than if you can't go to a gymnasium and to just learn together with the others. And studying was expensive as well because there were also university fees, quite large and high in fact, and of course the related living expenses. So with all these positive side conditions, she finally was able to enter university and start studying. So now let's look how this was if we look at a much slightly broader picture. We look at the first generation of female students in Marburg. In August 1903, the Prussian Minister for Education and Minister finally, by a decree, allowed that women could enter university in Prussia. This is the precise sentence. With highest empowerment, today I signed all the laws concerning the admission of women to universities. And in Marburg, for example, that meant that for the winter term 1908-09, 27 women signed up. Among these is Ruth Hensel, this young lady here, who was daughter of the Marburg professor of mathematics, Kurt Hensel, well-known algebraist, right, invented periodic numbers and other things, and he was really an important figure in Marburg because he was full professor there for 30 years. He shaped the department more than anybody else. And he was advisor of Hasse and Frankel, who will come into the picture in a few slides. So by all we know, and you will find further proof of that, Kurt Hensel was a strong defendant of women's studies. So he encouraged his daughters to go to university, Ruth Hensel being the first one who really took the opportunity, and other positive aspects. Later, very slowly, now with that law changed the curricula at girls' gymnasium slowly were adapted to what was needed for studying. But this was not very fast. Yeah, the percentage of female students that was typical for a German university in these times would have been between 3 and 7%. Now, the study carried out in Marburg, we wanted to know a bit more about the background and the future of these female students. So the first thing is concerning social background. Yes, it's not very surprising, but they all came from wealthy or very wealthy families. Indeed, in families with intermediate income, social or economic reason just dictated that priority would be given to the studies of the sons, right? Bringing 1 or 2 sons to university was already expensive. And well, if there was money left, you could send a girl, but it was just put on a different level. Almost all had an academic background, so typical parents of this first generation of students would have been teachers, professors, doctors, lawyers, and a kind, or army officers, a social class not to be forgotten. The army had an important role in German society at the time, which it has lost, fortunately, completely. The religious background is 80% Protestant students, 11% Catholic, and 4% Jewish. Now, certainly, since Marburg was a Protestant university, that the high dominance of the Protestant part would not come as a surprise. But in fact, this was typical for most universities. So here's just the numbers around the turn of the century. The German population was approximately consisted of 60% Protestant, 36% Catholics, and 1% Jewish inhabitants. So the overrepresentation of Jewish students is everywhere, basically, due to historical reasons for what kind of jobs were allowed to Jewish population. And Catholic students were much underrepresented because the Catholic areas of Germany were more rural than other ones, on average poorer, and higher education was not given high priority. So there was in the 19th century a big difference between religious justification for education in Catholic and Protestant population. On the Protestant side, education was considered as something God gives to you, and therefore you should take the opportunity and take it. On the Catholic side, it was considered that it takes away your attention from religion, and therefore not something, yeah, you can get an education, but it was not considered important. Okay? So there's a whole ethical aspect and philosophy behind, which is well studied, and Weber was in particular one who wrote all that in his books on sociology quite well. The average age of female students was higher than of male students. That's, of course, mainly due to the difficult access to Abattoir, where they had to take different paths with private teachers and other things. Since 1908, there was another law that allowed to replace the Abitur by at least 3 years of professional experience as a teacher. Right? So, in fact, about half the students female students entered the university through that back door of having been a teacher for a while and then trying to get a bit more education. In mathematics, the picture was a bit different because the age was lower than the average for female students, and in fact, more than 90% of the female math students had a regular Abitur. Another typical aspect is that there was high mobility between universities. Students would change a few times between Marburg, Göttingen, Bonn, Erlangen, just the typical places of the time. So 74 women studied mathematics in this first 5 years after 1908 when it was allowed. Of these, 17 did get a PhD in mathematics, 3 in education, and 1 in medicine. One, Marie Ferting, who is going to come, indeed became a professor of education out of that generation. And if we furthermore have a look at the first female PhD students, then we see that the first years where this happened was 1911, Jessie Cameron, British, 1915, Anna Sturmfeld, and 1923, Anna Dissel. In all three cases, Kurt Hensel was the advisor. Right? You had to find somebody who would be willing to accept you, and this was by far no means trivial in these times. Of these three, only Jessie Cameron worked for some time at the university, namely at Newnham College in Cambridge. The other two became math teachers. And here from the archive is this nice doctoral certificate of Anna Disse, right? So it says under the rector, blah, 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 and the dean, Fräulein Anna Disse is hereby granted the title of a doctor of philosophy. Okay. Here's a very exceptional family, the Werting girls, as I would call them. So Marie Werting, remember, he was first to become a professor. So this is the excerpt from the university archive of the immatriculation data. To enroll at university, what would you do? You go to an office, there's a list kept, and you write down, I will try once more, okay? So you write, it doesn't like me. No, it doesn't. So the name, Werting Mathilde and Werting Marie, okay? The year of birth and the place of birth, the topics enrolled, and then when they left the university, and because they left, the name was crossed out. So these two started there, and by the birth years, you see that they had an age difference of 4 years, and now this is a completely atypical family. So there were 10 siblings, 8 girls, 2 boys. They were from a rich Catholic family, already this is surprising, of farmers, so indeed from a rural area. And of these 10 children, 7 got a PhD. And if that's not enough, well, in fact, both parents had died in early years, and hence the oldest daughter, Marie, the one listed here, took care of her younger siblings. Right? And the family was so rich that they had, in fact, a private teacher just for the 10 kids. Right? So none of them would just attended the school, and that meant in particular also that all the 10 children got the same education. Marie Werting moved later to Bonn, and after her advisor had accepted the position in Prague, she had to change, and then she moved to Gießen with all the remaining younger siblings who hadn't yet entered university to finish her PhD and take care of her family at the same time. Right? So she got a degree there in 1910 with Moritz Pasch, and shortly after married and became a writer. And her autobiography is a rich source for typical working and study conditions of women around these times. She was becoming quite famous as a writer. Now, Mathilde Werting. Mathilde Werting got her PhD in Bonn in 1911 and did a teacher's certificate examination 1 year later. This was a reasonable thing to do. And she started teaching mathematics and physics at the Girls' Gymnasium in Berlin-Neukölln. In 1919, she submitted a habilitation thesis on the teaching of mathematics at the university in Berlin, which is now Humboldt University, and the thesis was rejected. It was not accepted by the faculty, was considered completely out of topic. I saw some not very friendly comments on her, but the fact that it was rejected didn't change anything to the fact that it was printed and read. Okay, so this was a popular text, even if not suitable for getting habilitation. And in 1923, so after the First World War, the Social Democratic Minister of Education in Thüringen, Max Richard Greil, because of her writing and work, decided to appoint her professor in Jena against the will of the faculty. And after Margarete von Wrangel, who was a professor in biology at the University of Hohenheim, she was therefore only the second woman to be appointed professor in Germany. Right? Unfortunately, the history does not have a happy end. In 1933, the rector of the University of Jena requested her dismissal because, well, this is my translation of the argument, her appointment and her behavior indicates that she does not back the national state. Right? So after the advent to power of Nazis, getting rid of anybody you didn't like was quite easy, and so she was the first to dismiss at that occasion. She had not been a member of any political party, but she was suspected to be a social democrat because she had been appointed by a social democrat, and anyway, a good Nazi woman does not is not a professor at the university. That's clear. She was not appointed again in 1945 and therefore did not work any further at the university in Germany. Okay, so obtaining a habilitation is not so easy, and in fact, yes, let's have a look at that. The problem that Mary Ferting encountered here is quite typical, because in the same year when studying was allowed for women, it was made clear by another law that they were not allowed to get a habilitation. Okay, studying, yes, but there's a limit somewhere, no habilitation. And so Emmy Noether submitted habilitation in 1915 at the department in Göttingen, just in the middle of the war. And also the faculty was very positive about it. Yeah, they wrote several letters to Berlin to obtain a special permission for Emmy Noether, stretching out the truly substantial, unique quality of her work. This was declined several times until 1970. And therefore, Emmy Noether was forced to announce her lectures under Hilbert's name. It's only after World War I that the law was abolished and Emmy Noether received her degree. And therefore, here is the list of the first habilitations decreed in Germany, 1919, Emmy Noether. And that was basically the earliest possible date for her habilitation because it was only allowed from 1918 on, and you needed some scientific work to present after all. And here is the list of habilitations by women in Germany in mathematics. The next one was in 1927, Hilda Polacek-Geiringer. People working in special functions know that name. She worked in Berlin for a certain time. 1936, Ruth Muffang in Frankfurt, who became the first appointed professor of mathematics in Germany. 1940, Hel Braun. So Hel is a shortcut for Helene, but she called herself Hel all her life. So that's why she even published under that abbreviation. She studied in Marburg and became professor in Hamburg later. And then you see by the years that progress was slow, right? I mean, from the others now, Maria Hasse is not related to Helmut Hasse. Sibylla Krampe-Priess was a permanent assistant in Munich, I remember. Irene Pieper-Seyer in Oldenburg, and Helga Bunke is the mother of Uli Bunke in Berlin. Stochastics.
There are no missing names.
No, this is the full list. Right? So as I'm saying, progress was very slow at the beginning. Yes? And if we go up to 1918, then now we have around 200 names approximately. I am 100 something. Okay, yes? Yeah, both together. Yeah, this is East and West Germany. Helga Bunke, for example, was GDR. And Maria Hasse as well. Maria Hasse was number theorist in Halle. Of the others, I don't know of each of them, but it's all both Germanys together. Yes. Thank you. Right. Despite the fact that Emmy Noether got her habilitation in 1919 finally, she was appointed Privatdozent at the University of Göttingen, but this did not mean being paid for the lectures. She received her first salary only in 1923, and before that she was living on the heritage of her parents, rather modestly as the recollections are, and even her first salary was just that of an assistant. So in that sense, she was not professor at any moment. She was Privatdozent because of the fact that she did have habilitation, but nothing else. No appointment. Oops. Okay, so what was student life like in these times? Well, there's another German peculiarity. This is what is called Burschenschaft. A Burschenschaft is a student fraternity, and these are all male student associations. Now, this was clear when they were founded, but it was never changed. In 1930, by the Wartburg Fest, they were created, and what was surprising at these times, these student fraternities were something extremely modern and liberal. Okay, because they wanted to renew the state, education, and many other things. By now, they have extremely bad reputation. In all old university towns, and unfortunately also in Marburg, you can see them once in a while, and you have the impression this is like Carnival from 19th century. Yeah, they disbehave. They are considered to be mostly nationalistic, and some of them even just right wing. Okay, around 1920, the situation was different. You had a large number of these fraternities. They have their own buildings partially, and a large number of students was member. And remember that female students were just a small minority anyway, and so they had a large influence on student life. And in particular in mathematics, what did that mean? Well, in these times there were no math tutorials organized by the universities. The math tutorials were organized by the fraternities. And also they had the books. So they had rented, the math fraternity in Marburg had rented a small room in a restaurant where they would keep their books and materials and organize their tutorials. Okay, there was a university library, of course, but they didn't have textbooks for beginning students. They were organizing talks weekly, etc. And we have the list of topics of the talks. It was really mathematics, it was not politics. Okay, this was the Mathematisch-Physikalischer Verein Mark-Manien. And it meant that this was a whole part of scientific life to which female students did not have access. And I don't know how they actually learned without being given access to tutorials. I just don't know, right? But in any event, the study conditions were much more difficult than of the other students. Here is a picture of the university prison in Marburg. So until 1945, with a few breaks, for smaller delicts, students were subject to the laws of the rector of the university, and the rector could send a student to prison for up to 2 weeks. Okay? In old times, this was rather annoying, but with times changing, and certainly at the beginning of the 20th century, it was considered a matter of honor to be in prison in your student life at least once. So the other students could bring you food and these things. This was allowed, and they were painting with the walls of this university prison. And you can see on these walls in particular the different signs of the different student fraternities in Marburg, right? And yeah, so the upshot is the study and work situation of male students was quite different of that of the female students. So here is now the story why Emmy Noether did not become Germany's first female math professor. Now, in these times, the math community was very small, and therefore professorships were not publicly advertised, but rather everybody knew who was looking for a job. And typically, you would think about it, whom could we appoint? And then the faculty presented a short list of names to the minister for the appointment, and then the minister typically would select from that list, could change the order on the list, but that was the procedure. Of course, this means that the procedure is extremely intransparent, right? The discussion process before is usually not recorded. So here is what happened. At the University of Kiel in October 1928, Ernst Steinitz, one of the founders of modern algebra, died rather unexpectedly. And though his colleague, Abraham Halevi Frankel, is given the task to prepare the shortlist for the minister in order to fill the position rather quickly. And as we had seen, Frankel had been educated in Marburg as a student of Kurt Hensel. He lived there for many years, got his habilitation there, and then had been appointed professor in Kiel in the meantime. Now, because of her strong work in algebra, Emmy Noether was, from a scientific point of view, a canonical candidate for that position. She was available in the sense she didn't yet have a position. She fulfilled all the formal requirements. She had Abattoir, degree, she had habilitation, she had given lectures for several years, right? 1990, the habilitation. So it was just the perfect moment for her to be appointed professor in Kiel in her topic. Now, happily for us, for research on history of mathematics, there's an extended mail exchange between Frankel and Helmut Hasse about this topic. And so we can reconstruct how they finally made the shortlist for the minister from their mail exchange. They knew each other very well. Hasse was also working in the field, so it was very logical and typical to consult colleagues in the topic, right? And they knew each other extremely well from their common times in Marburg anyway. Frankel is known that he has said several times in public that he found the treatment of Emmy Noether unjust. And Hasse was considered to be one of the closest friends of Emmy Noether. So actually, the circumstances were very positive, and nevertheless, she was not appointed. So the question is, what went wrong here? And this is the answer. Yeah, so here we just summarize once again Helmut Hasse and Abraham Frankl. Frankl, from a Jewish Orthodox family, was soldier in World War II, a fervent Zionist, and he moved to Jerusalem in 1931, became one of the first rectors of the university, founded the math department there, was very influential actually in Israel about how the high school system is being designed. He taught in schools. He had, there was a time for pioneers, and he was really a pioneer in mathematics in Israel. Hasse was son of a judge, also a soldier, rather nationalistic from his personal point of view. For example, he applied for membership in the Nazi Party in 1937 and was declined, not because of not being politically reliable, but just because of his Jewish ancestry. He indeed was the successor of Hensel in Marburg, but not for a long time. He then later moved to Göttingen, Berlin, and finally to Hamburg. So here's the mail exchange between Hasse and Frankl. First letter, Frankl to Hasse, October 8, 1928. Fräulein Noether. So they go to a list of names, right? And so to write what they think about these names. So Fräulein Noether, that she would be professor since long, when a man, despite her poor teaching, goes without saying. I think that working with her would be rather unpleasant. And I put in red all the arguments they put against her with developing mail exchange. Okay, so the first criticism is poor teaching. Okay, now believe me, I've spent my life in the German university teaching system. It's not like all the colleagues are perfect teachers. Good. Working with her would be rather unpleasant, but you do not see really any justification in the mail exchange which would explain why working with her would be unpleasant. It's left in the letter basically as a statement of fact. Okay, then comes the reply, Hasse to Frankl 2 days later. I am surprised that you even consider Fräulein Noether. Despite all her scientific achievements, I find her completely unfit to be full professor, and completely is underlined by Hasse himself. And even more at a small university like Kiel. She only fits a large university where she would never have to teach beginners, or beginning students. Also, I think that the experiment to make a woman full professor should not be carried out at a place like Kiel. So we move from teaching is not perfect to she's an unpleasant person to question of principle. The experiment to make a woman full professor. Should this be done? And if it should be done, should it be done at my place? Okay. Then Frankl to Hasse, 14th of October. I find your comments on Fräulein Noether encouraging not to put her on the list. And then it goes on for a while between the two, and at the end they both happily agree that unfortunately she could not be appointed. And in the end it was Theodor Kaluza who got the position. And if you look for the mail exchange, you realize, so it's quite possible that I'm not saying, I don't know whether her teaching was good, but it's clear that at no moment did they even consider to take into account any mitigating circumstances about a difficult career path. She didn't have the opportunity to teach large classes for beginners because she was not an außergewöhnlicher Professor in Göttingen. She had to announce her lectures under Hilbert's name. She was not given the opportunity to learn how to teach. So, right, this was just comparing things which you cannot compare. And by other accounts, we know that many hiring committees nowadays and in these times probably solved the issue of not to have to appoint Emmy Noether in a rather similar way, with the argument being said, a variation of, yes, in principle, she should be professor somewhere, but please not at my place, because she doesn't work well with colleague X, because we're too small, because of beginners teaching, whatever. So in principle, yes, but not here. Okay? This is a very common pattern for justifications. And, well, a few years later, even her meager position as Privatdozent in Göttingen was taken away to her because in 1933 there was a law passed by the Nazis to get rid of all civil servants they wanted to get rid of. This was a very effective tool for Nazification. It hit mostly Jews, but not only. For example, members of communist or social democratic parties, personal enemies, and anybody considered to be unreliable like working women were also sent into early retirement. And Emmy Noether fulfilled not only one of these conditions, but several of them. She was of Jewish origin. She was a dedicated pacifist. And between 1918 and 1924, she had even been a member of the Social Democratic Party. So that was just too much. She was dismissed in September, so quite quickly, and this is a letter informing her about it, and immigrated to the US, but there she obtained only a guest professorship at a women's college, Bryn Mawr College, right? And died there after some surgery in April 1935. So that ends that story, unfortunately. Now let's have a look at a few other careers to get an impression what this general situation was. Here's a very typical career, namely the career of Anna Disse, whom we remember was the third to get a PhD in Marburg in 1923. So she had been the daughter of a professor of medicine in Marburg. She had already worked as a teacher before being admitted to university. In 1909, she prepared the external Abattoir with the help of a private teacher paid by her family. Studied in Marburg from 1909 to 12, got the advanced teacher's exam in 1913 finally, and then worked at the Kippenberg Gymnasium in Bremen until her retirement. This is a picture from the archive of this Kippenberg Gymnasium in Bremen. She published quite a lot of books on math education and education in general in Bremen. So for math teaching in northern Germany, she had quite some influence. And she's a very typical example of the single female teacher, which in German you would call a Fräulein Lehrerin, right? This is virtually every German knows one of these single female teachers, okay? So it's a very common and popular figure in German society. And the reason why this is the case comes here. There was something special, again, Germany, that by law, from a law which was passed around 1880, female teachers were not allowed to marry. So in some places it was even extended to all civil servants, and this has even a German name, which is called Lehrerinnen-Zölibat. It's a celibacy for female teachers. And if it was extended to all civil servants, then it's Beamtinnen-Zölibat. You're not women. By marriage, so if you married nevertheless, you automatically lost your position. You were fired the day of marriage, and you lost all your retirement pensions. Okay, so if you got divorced or anything happened afterwards, you would not be entitled for any pension for the years of service you have done. In general, anyway, women needed a work permission of their husbands until 1977 in Germany, West Germany. Were allowed to have their own bank account only in 1962. And this means that for all female students listed before, they had to make a choice at some moment. If they wanted to work, it meant necessarily not marrying and not having a family. The law was abolished for a few years in the first years of the Weimar Republic, from between 1918 and 23. But it was reintroduced quite quickly in times of raising unemployment rates, right? Because, there were just fewer positions, and one wanted to secure these for the male candidates. So female teachers were given all kind of bad, worse working conditions, so they were not allowed to have a family, they were paid less, and they had to pay higher taxes. Exceptions were only made when it could not be avoided. For example, at places with a shortage of teachers, or during the Second World War, because there were just no teachers at all. Between 1950 and 57, there was at least a slight change in the law. Namely, dismissal was not automatic anymore, but it was checked first, at least, whether the husband would earn enough to care for a family. And this was not trivial at the time. So, for example, my mother-in-law lost her job exactly because of that law, despite the fact that her husband was unemployed. So we're just left without any income. That was the law. And in 1957, at least, it disappeared. So here are some comments about competition. This is a recurring theme in the backgrounds in all the documents you read on the topic. So implicitly or explicitly, you have certain people all running for the same category of jobs, right? Because these jobs exist only in limited number, because of relatively high social status of these jobs and relatively high income. A professor is a person with a very high status in German society, and teachers for the higher classes at gymnasium as well. But also, not only because of this competition, but also because just all these hiring policies reflect changes in society, right? So the observation is the right to get an Abattoir or to study is incomplete if there are no adequate jobs for you after graduation. If you're not allowed to become a teacher, or teacher, yes, but with less income, etc., then this is not really the end of the story, right? It's an incomplete picture. So there was, for example, a fierce opposition against women becoming teachers at the gymnasium, basically by the male colleagues, because their working conditions were better and they didn't want to lose them. For women of the working class, the situation was completely different. Right? We are talking here about educated people with a high school degree and universities. So in the working class, there was no question whether working and having a family were compatible issues. And there was also no way of forbidding to marry or something, because salaries were so low and the working conditions were so terrific, right, that there was no other options anyway. So the situation for the working class was very different. The ideals of the middle class we're talking about here were different from that of the working class. For example, it was considered that a good family father had to be somebody to be able to supply for a family. This was almost the definition, right? So a working wife basically put that ideal upside down. And that's why it was considered to be so difficult. A good mother, on the other side, had to care for house and children. That's what she was raised for. Again, only in the middle class. Yeah? So whenever real life did not match the ideal picture, for example, because of shortage, because your husband had died in one of the wars, or because there were all male teachers, professors were away at war anyway, then exceptions were made. But you can see quite clearly that they were suppressed again as soon as possible when the outer circumstances allowed it, right? So these laws, like the celibacy for teachers, getting a high school degree or not whatsoever, have to be put into this context. Okay, we are slowly coming to an end. Emmy Noether, for strange reasons, was long forgotten completely in Göttingen. And it's only in 1984 that they slowly realized that with Emmy Noether, they had somebody in their department had in the past years, which was somebody to be proud of. So it was Samuel Patterson, professor in Göttingen but American, who proposed to transform the former custodian's apartment in the basement into a faculty lounge and to name this after Emmy Noether, right? And the American guest professor John McCreary helped him in this task and also made the picture on the wall. So I personally do not find it a coincidence that it was two American professors in Germany who had this idea to name a room after Emmy Noether. This is a picture from this lounge, because he was just more popular with her work in the US in these times than in Germany. Now this has changed completely. Now you find Emmy Noether's name everywhere. So there's a prestigious grant, Emmy Noether Nachwuchsgruppe, which is named after her. There's a professorship named after her. There is at the DMV, this is the German Math Society, there's an annual meeting. So at the annual meeting, there's a plenary lecture named after her, the Emmy Noether lecture. There are many other things named after her. The math department in Erlangen is named after Emmy Noether by now, and so on. Right? But this is a relatively recent development. Right, and here you have two guys, and you even yesterday you had right sweatshirt, right? So here is the gallery of math professors in Marburg, and the one I'm pointing at is Kurt Hensel, Frankel, and Hasse in the row below. And this is the finishing view on Marburg and all these little charming university towns where all these stories took place. Thank you, and here are the references.
Thank you very much, Ilka. I think it was really impressive because it would have been really hard to access this information just by Googling it.
No way.
I guess it was a real work to collect all this information. Mm-hmm. Do you have any questions? Maybe I should get the mic for questions. So no questions?
Yes, one here.
Oh.
Yeah. I like simple questions.
Are you going to upload slides on the internet? Yes, to share.
Yes. I was thinking actually of putting them on my webpage. So if you Google my name, which is not difficult because it's unique, basically, you will find a topic on my webpage which is called publications. And if you go on publications, there's articles, books, and slides. Okay, and I do not put the slides of all my talks because that's pointless. It's variations of complicated things, but I just put slides which I believe are of interest to the general public and more exceptional. So I will put these slides, yes.
That's good to know. I have a question. I don't know if one can answer this question, but when you read the quotations of the professors which were required to say whether they agreed to women being allowed to study and so on, it seems that the negative opinions were always like, no. But the positive opinions were like, well, maybe I wouldn't want to recognize it, but I did have some students. So they supported their arguments. So it seems that, or if you look at the mailing exchange between Hasse and Frankel, it seems that they said nobody would like her, but they did not give any argument. So I guess it's because they didn't really have any. But what do you think would go through their mind just to say no justification at all?
No, well, this is all speculation. So if you look at this book with these opinions about whether women should study or not, I mean, this is a great document because it gives you really a good representative insight into what the opinions were at the time. And your observation is right. Those who were in favor of women studying gave arguments, and mostly these were arguments, variations of, I've seen some studying and it worked, right? Whereas the others, most of them did not find it important to give arguments, found it just automatic. And why would you ask such a question? Yeah. You had a few who were extremely aggressive, but these are, you have a Gauss distribution, so you have a few very positive, you have extremely negative ones as well. I did not pick these on purpose because that's not representative. We're just aggressive, not pleasant to read. Okay. Yes, the argument exchange between whether she was unpleasant to work with or not. I believe that by her career, we do not have any written documents about how Emmy Noether thought about her treatment, right? But she must have been frustrated about some of these aspects. It cannot be different from that. But she never complained. No complaints, nothing is recorded of that time. So she must have been extremely patient, and she had, after all, successful male students. So it must have been possible to work with her. Now, of course, she did not have a huge gallery of students, but that's clear. She didn't have a position, and it was a very difficult and abstract topic, right? It is not suitable for a broad range of students. So I do not remember reading or encountering at any moment any precise recordings who would justify or say at some moment why working with Emmy Noether would have been unpleasant. That I haven't seen. Why Frankel had this opinion remains his secret. It's not clear from the mail exchange afterwards.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question?
I don't have a question. I have a comment. In the early 1990s, Professor Mariemi Alonso, who's there, and myself, we were then members of the European Women in Mathematics group, and we were, I can't remember where it was, Lumini, somewhere in a meeting, and we met at the time Ina Kirsten, which was the president of the German Mathematical Society, and as Emmy Noether, she did not have a permanent job at the time. She was in the same position as Emmy Noether.
And she was in Göttingen.
Yeah, and she was the president, and she was in Göttingen, and she was the president of the Mathematical Society of Germany. So it's not surprising that Emmy Noether was at the time ignored.
Yes.
Probably they were a little ashamed that they hadn't learned because they were still treating women exactly the same way in the late 20th century as they had in the beginning. It was much commented among
I know Ina Kirsten, and she was the only woman so far to be president of the German Math Society. Yes, and there's a presidium of the German Math Society, and I'm the only woman in that gremium. Yes.
But you're a professor, so it seems very slow.
I'm full professor, yes, and I'm first full professor in Marburg in mathematics, of course.
Okay, let's thank Ilka again very much. We take a couple of minutes break to change the slides, and then we continue with Kape's talk. Okay.